You are listening to the Wool Academy podcast. This is episode number 2. Hello and welcome. My name is Elisabeth van Delden, and once a week we talk to an industry expert from the wool industry supply chain from farm to fashion and beyond, delivering strategies and insights to be successful in wool and showcasing those beautiful stories wool has to tell. Today's episode is supported by The Wool Room. The Wool Room is dedicated to delivering you a better night's sleep. At thewoolroom.com you can choose from a wide range of mattresses, mattress protectors, bedding and beds filled with British wool, ensuring that you stay cool and comfortable at night. Find out how wool can improve your sleep by visiting thewoolroom.com and claim your 10% discount with the promo code WOOLACADEMY. And now let's get started with today's guest. Today we welcome Lesley Prior, who is a sheep farmer from the UK based in the south of England near Devon. Lesley runs her own business under the brand name Bowmont, which she will tell us more about in today's episode. Welcome, Lesley. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm very pleased to be here and to be part of this very exciting project.
Great. I'm so glad you could join us today. And let's maybe start by yourself introducing what you do and all about your business so that our audience can learn more about yourself.
Great. Okay. Well, as you rightly said in the introduction, I'm a sheep farmer. We also have goats. So we have a flock of superfine Merino sheep and a flock of Mongolian grade cashmere goats. And we have a large farm in the southwest of England in Devon. And we produce good quality fibre and sell it direct to retailers. We cut out the middlemen and go direct to brands and sell the wool by taking it from the back of the sheep all the way through the processing chain for the end user, and they then take over and do the marketing and selling of the goods made from our fibre. It's a way of working which we enjoy. It gives us connectivity throughout the textile chain and means we have perhaps a little bit more control over where our fibre eventually ends up. It's incredibly satisfying and we love doing what we're doing very much. It's a very exciting thing to be doing.
Well, that sounds really interesting. And tell me, have you always been working or living on a farm, or how did you come into the industry?
No, it's quite a new thing for us, actually. I was born and brought up in London, and in fact, I didn't even have a garden until I was quite grown up. We had no experience of the countryside, and we didn't move to Devon until about 12 years ago, when we bought a farm and had to do something with the land. So it's a very new venture for us, and maybe for some people they'd say, well, how can you possibly be farming merino sheep and cashmere goats when you have no experience? But in some ways it's a good thing, because you always then have to go and ask. You always have to learn from experts. You have to look everything up. You don't make any assumptions, and you try always to do your best, because it's a new thing to you. So for us, it's worked very well. We hit the ground running 12 years ago, and we're still running now.
Well done. So pretty much a self-taught wool grower we have here on the show today.
Well, perhaps, yes, self-taught to begin with, but then I was very fortunate because I made contact with AWI in Australia, and they were so good and so kind and so generous with help and support to me. And so, no, not self-taught. Yes, for the first couple of years we were self-taught, but after that we had immense support and help with all the resources of AWI at our back, and we are very grateful to them for their help.
Yeah, they're definitely doing a great job. And tell me,
They do.
So what I know is that your sheep flock, or that you actually breed merino sheep in the UK, is quite unusual for a wool grower in the UK, because usually there are other types of sheep with more coarser wool. So tell us a little bit about your flock and how that is something special for the UK.
Yeah, it is something special for the UK, but it's actually not that special. Merinos have been part of UK sheep farming for over 200 years. It's something that people don't realise. Just 5 miles from here, where I am on my farm, George Pepin was born. Now, George Pepin, that's a name that many Australians will know very well. The Pepin Merino is one of the main parts of the Australian merino industry today, and George Pepin, who developed that animal, was actually born only 5 miles away from this farm, and he bought merinos in the local town around here 200 years ago. So there is a long and strong tradition of merino growing in the UK. What happened was that we actually had an industrial revolution very early, and we had to start producing a lot of meat for our new towns. So our native breeds that were much more meaty and had a better carcass became very popular. And the wool growing sheep, the merino, which always had a small, not very good carcass, fell out of fashion. So we offloaded growing our very fine wool to our new colony in Australia. So we didn't have to grow the wool anymore. We could concentrate on the meat. And that's what happened in the UK. But in Europe, merino growing continued because they didn't have a tradition of having a colony like Australia that they could use to supply the wool. So in Europe, even today, there are large flocks of wool-producing merino sheep. It's only in the UK that we've lost the tradition. So yes, we are now very unusual, but historically it wasn't the case. Our sheep were the result of a research project run by the Scottish government. They wanted to try and recreate this merino tradition in the UK, and they worked for 20 years to produce the sheep that I acquired 12 years ago. It was a mixed success. They'd got some very old Tasmanian superfine genetics, some Valleyfields blood. There was also a little bit of Sierra Park blood and some Merivale blood in the original line. So fantastic lines, but the genetics were 30, 40 years old by the time they got hold of them. So that's what we inherited. And we quickly found that the sheep did okay here in our conditions, but the crop was very light, the animals were very small, the colour wasn't great, and there were a lot of things wrong with it. So we stumbled on for a few years until we made contact with AWI, and we then found out what we didn't know and what we needed to know, and made contact with some fantastic people in Australia who helped us. And the consequence was we imported new genetics directly from Australia. And that's what we've been doing ever since. So very, very quickly, the sheep that we started with have changed, and we now have a much more commercial, much more acceptable, much higher quality wool flock here, which is doing very well, even under British conditions. There is absolutely no reason on earth why merinos cannot grow well in the UK. It's just a question of being careful with the genetics that you purchase and making sure you understand the conditions that you're growing them in. So that's a little bit of background, really. Sorry, it's a long story.
No, but it shows the detail that need to go into wool growing. And do you also see that you inspire other farmers around you in the UK? Are they now also becoming more interested in
No,
raising
no,
merino?
not really in the UK. Unfortunately, I wish it was the case, but the UK is very set in its ways. Sheep farming here is meat, 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 and more meat. Wool has become a waste product, unfortunately, in the UK, and it's extremely difficult to get farmers to move away from that mentality. It's not the case in Europe. European farmers still have that understanding of what merino is and what merino can be if you give it the chance. And it's there that I see our future. We have a very high health status flock here, so we are able to export sheep directly into Europe, and that's where I see our future. I see us acting as a halfway house, as a trial ground for Australian genetics in European conditions. So genetics come over here from Australia. We test them for a few years to make sure that they're doing okay under our different climatic conditions, and then we export them on into Europe with test materials with figures and facts to back up the fact that they do actually do well in our conditions. Because it's all very well for somebody in Australia to say, yes, we produce this, we produce that, we have the most amazing sheep. But to translate that into growing those animals in Germany, in France, in Spain even, is very different. So really trialing them in Northern Europe is a good idea, and that's what I see ourselves doing as part of our business.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, that this is what forms one part of your business. What are the different income streams that you have in your business today?
Well, we have three income streams really. Firstly, and primarily, our income comes from growing superfine merino and selling that wool, and also the cashmere, which is of equal importance to the business. Secondarily, I have a consultancy business, and I have worked recently for the American government in Afghanistan, and I've also worked for a growers group in Switzerland, advising them on breeding programs and management of their current flocks. So that's a second income stream. And then thirdly, we have this developing and small but developing business of selling genetics and live animals to Europe and also to other parts of the world.
Okay. So I'm always impressed that all the farmers I've met around the world, they're real entrepreneurs, and they approach their farming really as any other business. So I think that's very impressive what you do as well.
I think it's essential if you want to survive in these days. Economics are the thing. The bottom line is that you have to make a profit. And if you can't make a profit with what you're doing, then perhaps it's time to give up and go and do something else. So this business actually has to make a profit. It's not just a hobby. It's not just a lifestyle thing. It's a fully functioning business that has to produce a profit at the end of it. And that's the way I think all wool growers should approach what they do. It's difficult because we wool growers, we're living with sheep every day. We love what we do. We love the environment in which we work. We love our animals. And sometimes if you don't make a profit, it's very hard to come to terms with the fact that maybe you need to get out of it and go and do something else. So we all really need to be creative, we need to be clever, we need to be industrious, we need to try hard to find other ways to make money so that we can survive in what's a tough market out there.
Yeah. And where do you see your biggest single challenge in your wool, like mainly on your wool growing side or in your business in general today?
I don't think we have a problem with making a profit. Really, I have two main issues. One of them is working in isolation. It is lonely when you're the only person growing merino in the UK, really, in a commercial way. I'm very grateful for many kind wool growers in Australia and other parts of the world who offer friendship and support and the chance to talk, and thank goodness for the internet, because I spend a lot of time doing what I'm doing with you now, and that's talking to people around the world, discussing problems that we have, and that's fantastic. But it would still be very nice to have a few people in the UK to whom I could talk. So isolation is a bit of a problem. And then the other very fundamental problem is I don't have enough sheep. I need to increase my flock dramatically in order to supply the demand that I have. I have tremendous demand for the product, and it's a great sadness to me that I have a queue of customers and not enough wool to supply them all. So more sheep, and more sheep. That's what I need.
Okay, so as you say, talking about your customers, I think one of the most prominent customers that one can read about you is the brand called Finisterre. And
Yep.
maybe tell us a little bit more about that collaboration that you have with them.
Yeah, well, Finisterre is a collaboration that I've had for about 7 years now. It came entirely out of the blue. It was not something I was looking for. I had a phone call one day from their design director, and he said that they had been looking for a source of British merino because they are a cold water surfing business, which I don't know if your listeners know much about that, but cold water surfing is precisely what it says. It's not surfing in Hawaii, it's not surfing off Bondi Beach, it's surfing in the cold waters of the North Atlantic around the UK and Northern Europe. It's a very, very cold affair, and you need to keep warm both before, during, and after you go surfing. So they use a lot of merino in next to skin wear and also as fashion wear. And a lot of their customers were very keen on ethical sourcing, on high welfare standards, and on high standards of production. So Finisterre had been looking for a source of British merino that they could have full traceability on, and with whom they could develop a good customer and supplier relationship. So they came to me. We had a big meeting around our kitchen table, and we decided that we all got on very well. We shared the same view of what we were doing. They liked the way I treated my animals, the way I ran my farm, the way I harvested my wool. And we started working together. It was very small to begin with. They made one hat in the first year. That was it, just one type of hat from my wool crop. I was able to set up the wool chain, the processing chain for them, because I had already established that chain with my cashmere. And the same processors, the same spinners agreed to process my merino for them. So we arranged all that, and they produced this one hat with my wool, and it sold out very, very quickly. So it was a huge success, and every year since then, they have produced a very small range, limited collection from my wool. And people wait for it every year, and it sells out very quickly, usually say within about 3 weeks. And it's working extremely well. They come and visit regularly. They film what we do on the farm. They talk to me. They interview me. I had an interview very similar to this only last week, and we did some drone footage flying over the sheep, flying over my working dog on the farm, showing what I'm doing on a daily basis, all of that sort of thing. They photograph, they film, and they talk about on their social media sites and their internet sites. So it's a very good relationship, but it's quite high maintenance. I have to be prepared to be public facing all the time, and that I think is important. It's a way forward for modern merino businesses, I think.
Yeah, and that's what I love also about your website, that you're very open. You tell a lot of stories, how you show a lot of pictures of your dog, and how you even explain how your dog is, behaving with your sheep, etc. So I love
Yep.
that you are very open, and it shows that there is a demand from brands like Finisterre who really appreciate this transparency. And yeah, that's also one of my questions, like what role does communications play in your business?
Oh, I think it's vital. I think it can make the difference between success and failure, actually. I think some people are better communicators than others, obviously, and you can't expect everybody to be happy talking to the media or talking even to customers face to face, but we have to try. It's the best way to get our message across. If we have a lot to be proud about, a lot to share, a lot to shout about, a lot to be joyful about in our industry, then we must be prepared to stand up and say that. There are so many people out there who want to be negative about wool. They want to tell the bad side of the story. And of course, sure, there are people out there who are not good wool growers. There are a few, but the vast majority of us are passionate about what we do. We love our animals, we love the environment that we share with them, and we need to get out there and shout about that a little bit more loudly than we do. So for me, communication is vital, and it can make the difference between winning a customer and keeping them and not having a customer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, is that also a reason why you joined, or you're very highly engaged in the campaign for wool? And for those who don't know, the campaign for wool, it's also a promotional campaign that has Prince Charles, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, as his patron. And I think you've been joining the campaign since the very start on Savile Row in 2010. How did that come about?
Yes, that's right. Well, I was very lucky. I was asked by AWI to represent the Australian merino industry at the launch event for the Campaign for Wool in 2010 in Savile Row in London. It's the for those who don't know, Savile Row is the home of top quality bespoke tailoring, men's tailoring in London, and it's a centre of excellence and of course a very high user of the very best quality merino wool. And the Australian wool industry asked me to stand there with my sheep and represent the entire wool industry of Australia. And I have to say, it was probably the proudest moment of my life to be asked to do that. Me, with my few merinos, standing there representing Australia. I couldn't believe how privileged I was. And I spent the whole day walking on air, talking to so many wonderful and interesting people, everybody from the world of fashion to the world of wool producers in Australia to the media, everybody. I had a wonderful time. And I also, of course, met people who were founding and starting the Campaign for Wool. And the result of that was that they asked me to join the council for the campaign, which I did very happily in June the following year. And I've been a member of council ever since. So we get heavily involved in decision making about how we should promote wool on a global scale. It's very much a global scale and a bulk retailer scale. We're not involved in very small local events. We have to leave that to other people, but we are promoting wool globally, running advertising campaigns, big promotional events, overseeing events in other cities, other capitals around Europe and the world, under this overarching umbrella of the campaign headed by His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, who I must say has been an enormous asset to us. We're very lucky to have his patronage, and for the fact that he is so very much engaged. His name tends to open doors for us, and when he says something, people will listen. And that's enormously helpful for us in the campaign, and we're very grateful to His Royal Highness for that support.
And have you already seen some positive changes happening because of the Campaign for Wool?
Yes, definitely. I feel very strongly that that's happening. There's a general increase in awareness among consumers and retailers. And for example, some of our biggest high street retailers here in the UK are now using significantly larger amounts of wool in their product ranges. I'm particularly happy to see the increase of use of wool in interior textiles because not everybody grows merino, of course, and in the UK in particular, there are many people, of course, who are growing much coarser wool, and we must also find increased use for that. So the increase in interior textiles is particularly satisfying. And it's a huge untapped market as well. There's all sorts of aspects of wool in the home that have only just begun to be explored. You know, the safety aspect, the health benefits of sleeping under wool and having wool in your environment, wool carpets, wool curtains, wool upholstery. All of those things are only just beginning to be exploited fully, the understanding of the science behind the benefits of wool. It's a tremendously exciting time to be involved in the industry. And yes, the campaign is playing a big part in promoting all of that.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree, and it's wonderful that you're supporting that also as a grower, because I think it's important that, as you said earlier, the growers and the end of the supply chain need to come together regularly and work together and better understand each other. And maybe also...
Yes, I think that's true.
Yeah, and maybe also for a better understanding, maybe tell us a little bit what does a typical day look like for you? so that we better
Well,
know what to do.
a typical day is very variable. It depends, of course, because I'm a farmer and a grower. It depends on the time of year. So, in the summer, for example, now it's a relatively easy day for me. It always starts early with a walk out to see all my animals, or a ride because we have quite a big farm. So sometimes I don't walk everywhere. I get in my little vehicle and drive around, checking all the animals are okay, checking the fences are all right, checking the water supply is okay everywhere. It always starts with that because the animals have to be the priority. If I haven't got my animals, I have no business. So they are always the priority for me. And then what happens after that depends very much on what's in my diary. Sometimes it might be an admin day. Sometimes I might be hosting a photo shoot for a customer. We've had many photo shoots here on the farm, talking to us or looking at the sheep, or in fact having fashion shoots. You know, we have models here sometimes doing shoots for various magazines and things. So it might be that. It might be having interviews with people who perhaps need my help in facilitating meetings or arranging processing chains. I like to do all that sort of thing as part of my consultancy business. Sometimes we are perhaps listening to people who are constructing questionnaires or want advice on how to support or develop new initiatives in the wool industry that involve growers. We've been asked for our opinion on many occasions, and we're happy to give it and help if we can change the way people think or move their direction. All of that sort of thing we have to do. And then obviously there are other day-to-day husbandry tasks with the sheep. If it's a lambing time, it's very busy. I'm 24/7 in the lambing sheds. Today, as I speak to you, we are shearing, and I'm not personally shearing. Obviously, I'm talking to you, but I have two people down in my shed busy shearing. We're shearing almost year round now because we have different groups being shorn at different times. And for the adults, we've now moved to shearing 3 times in 2 years. So shearing is a pretty much year round operation, as it is on many Australian setups. So there's that. Then there's meetings, courses, conferences to attend away from the farm. And on top of all that, I do always set aside time for my own research and study, because I'm still a beginner in all this as far as I'm concerned, and I have to keep up with what's going on. So private study, private learning is extremely important to me, so that I keep up to date and do the best job I can, both for my sheep and for my customers.
Oh yeah, I love that. That's also what I set out to do. That it's important to continue learning every
Yes,
day. And
it
maybe,
is.
but obviously you have come a long way now, and maybe you can share with us, what did you learn during the last 12 years that you wish you knew at the beginning of your career in wool growing?
Well, it's probably to say I wish I had realized right at the beginning just what a fantastic experience this whole thing was going to be, and just how wonderful it is, and how exciting this industry is, and how passionate I was going to feel about it. I love it. I get out of bed every day thinking how lucky I am to be involved with this and to be doing what I'm doing. If I'd realized 12 years ago how I feel about it, and how I feel after, even just after the whole 12 years, I still feel exactly the same. I would have started a whole lot earlier, I think. I'd have given up what I was doing and started 20 years ago. It's just such a fantastic industry. I think I was surprised at the passion that it was going to engender, both in me and also the passion that other people in our industry have. Everybody I meet throughout the chain uh, has this same buzz, this same energy, and we all share that. I mean, when we were at the IWTO Congress in Sydney, I felt that very strongly. Everybody, from the retailers through to the growers, that all of us, whatever we did, had this wonderful sense of energy and excitement and buzz, and that's such an amazing experience. We would have done that many years ago if we'd realised just how a wonderful industry it is to be part of.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's also the reason why I started this podcast, because I felt all the people I met in the wool industry are so passionate, and there are so many
Yep.
interesting stories that someone just needs to tell them. So that's why I also it was the passion exactly what was motivating me to do this.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
how can, maybe just also to get a message out to people listening to us, how can the wool industry support farmers like yourself to be even more successful in the future?
Well, I think I've been very lucky. I've had tremendous support from everybody throughout the chain, and I've needed it because obviously, as a grower of a relatively small amount of wool in the early days, I needed people to bend over backwards really to help me. I mean, when you think about large commercial processing units, they have fairly limited tolerance for small amounts. They can't just take wool from half a dozen sheep. That's just not practical, obviously. Well, we weren't in that situation, but we were still relatively small. And we were very lucky. The people that we asked to process our wool were big commercial producers, but they were prepared to help us and to do it, even though it meant that they probably weren't going to make any money out of the deal. Um, and it was going to take them a lot more time because they'd have to change all the settings on their machines. They still did it. Now, that was a wonderful gift to us for which I shall always be very grateful because it gave us that start, that professionalism, that ability to produce a top quality finished product from our fibre. And that is essential if we that was essential if we were going to succeed in our business. And I'm immensely grateful. And I would like to think that other processors would be equally accommodating to new and small people, equally supportive to us and others like us as years go by. It's not to say that growers like us could get away with being anything but professional. You know, you have to be professional. You have to be very knowledgeable. And for example, Peter Gledhill, who runs Gledhill and Sons, the mill in Yorkshire that spins our wool for us at the moment. Um, when I first approached him to spin for us, was naturally a little bit hesitant, and I had to go and spend a 3-hour session with him going through the mill. I was being tested the whole time, and I was very aware of that. It was all very friendly, all very polite, and the whole thing was just dressed up as a tour of his mill. But I knew that he was constantly questioning me as we were going around, talking about the machinery, talking about the fibre, talking about the settings, the whole process. He was trying to find out what I knew, whether I knew what I was talking about. And then he finally took me into his wool store and showed me some New Zealand merino. And he said to me, so what's the micron on that then? And I said, oh, it was a real guess actually, because I wasn't that experienced in those days. I said, 15. And he said, 14.5. He said, I'll spin for you. And at that point, I'm afraid I gave him a hug because I was so relieved and thrilled to think that I'd obviously passed his test. But what the message behind that is, yes, it was fantastic that he was able to help us with our small quantities of wool, and I'm very grateful. But the grower, me, I still had to be professional. I still had to know what I was talking about. So, to processors out there who are often the most difficult part of the chain for growers to find, I would say, please back down your chain and hold a hand out to the people who are just beginning, like myself. Hold a hand out to pull us up onto the first step of the process. Help us if you can. But don't accept anything but top quality. I don't expect you to do that. But I would ask you just to help those of us like me starting at the beginning, because you never know where it'll lead. You can end up with some amazing products and some amazing stories, and you'll give yourself a really good feel factor at the end of it as well if you've helped somebody on the way.
Yeah, no, I agree that collaboration within the industry is really key. And but
Yeah.
let's also maybe talk about, like, if we could, or dream a little bit, like if we could change one thing in the wool industry, what would that be? what would you change?
I think it's to encourage much better communication throughout the chain within the industry and without. I think all of us need to have the courage to talk about what we do more. For growers, we have to face our public, we have to face consumers and not be afraid to talk to people, to have belief in what we do, to be able to justify what we do when somebody questions it. Um, I I feel that very strongly. You know, none of us are perfect. We can only do the best that we can in the circumstances that we have, but we need to communicate that more. I had a good example when I was at Savile Row with my sheep. I mean, I had a few questions which were unbelievable from people, just showing the depth of ignorance. One woman came up to me and said, "Do your sheep sleep?" Which is extraordinary. You know, I mean, fancy not knowing that sheep sleep, but she didn't. She really didn't. Um, and I answered her, yes, of course. Yes, they do. And they dream because all mammals dream. And she went away delighted to know that. But it opened my eyes to the lack of understanding that ordinary people have about animals. So we have to talk to people. We have to be prepared to stand there. And then another man came up to me, and he obviously had a very different agenda. He was quite aggressive, and he said to me, "Do you produce cruelty-free wool?" And I said to him, "Well, if you can explain what you mean by cruelty-free wool, I can tell you if I produce it." Now he couldn't answer that. He couldn't explain what he meant. And clearly, he didn't really understand what the term might mean. He hadn't any background knowledge. So we talked for a little bit, and he said, "Can I come and visit your farm?" I said, "Yes, here's my card. If you wish to visit, you are welcome." And that's the last I heard from him. So we sometimes the encounters can be scary, but we do need to get out there and take the risk, talk to the public, be prepared to listen to their worries, and when we can, to justify what we do. Not be ashamed, not be afraid, just justify what we do all the time. Be proud of it as well. And that goes for all parts of the chain. We talk about growing wool, we talk about living animals, living sheep, but other people in the chain processors have to talk about how they deal with their effluent, their dirty water, their waste product. They have to do the same. They have to communicate that. Some people do it very well, other people don't do it very well, and all of us need to make a much better job of communicating. So I would say that communicate, communicate, communicate. Talk to people, talk to everybody within the chain and outside to our final customer.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and that's exactly what I'm also obviously trying to do with my own consulting business. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
I could hire you as my advertising and marketing officer. But I totally agree that it is really important to communicate, and thank you for
Yes.
sharing those stories with us today. And so before we close, please let us know, how can people find out more about you? How can they reach you?
Great. Yes, that's fine. Well, we run both our wool business and our consultancy business under the same title of Bowmont. So if people wish to talk to me, then they can reach me through my website, which is www.bowmontuk.com. And that's probably the best way. And you'll find an email link there, which will come straight through to me. And I'd be happy to answer any queries or questions if I can.
Wonderful. And we'll also link to that website on our show notes so people have easy access to reach you.
Great.
Well, thank you so much,
Thanks.
Lesley, for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I appreciate it even more because we know now how busy you are, and the most important is for you to attend to your sheep so that they're healthy and produce that high quality of wool. So thank you very
absolutely.
much for that.
I have to go down to the shed now and make sure that they're being shorn properly. It's a new shearer and he's learning his job, so he's very slow, but he's doing a good job. So that's great news. He's very careful with them, which is lovely.
Okay, great. Wonderful to know that. Well, thank you so much. And we say goodbye for now and all the best.
Okay.
Bye-bye. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure you access all the additional information about today's show by going to our website. Visit elisabethvandelden.com/002. That is elisabethvandelden.com/002. If you liked today's show, may we recommend that you subscribe to our podcast so that you don't miss any of our next episodes, and also do us a favor and tell your colleagues and friends about us. That would mean the world to us, and thank you and see you next week. Bye bye.